Welcome to LabMinutes.com. You might have heard the term BYOD, or Bring Your Own Device. So what it is for organization to allow the users to bring personal devices like laptop or smartphone and connect to the network to access corporate resources or just to get access to internet. So for us as the network administrator need to make sure the process of getting these devices onto the network, or so-called onboarding, is as seamless as possible without users having to seek any technical support, and most importantly, once they're connected, only appropriate resources can be accessed. So in our mini video series in Cisco ISE BYOD, we will look at how users can make their devices known to ISE through the process of device registration. Then devices can automatically receive network settings, so there's no need for the users to manually configure things like authentication protocols on their device. And finally, having a certificate pushed to it for it to use for the future connections. Once users have successfully authenticated, you can determine what resources they can access based on things like group membership on the AD, or the device's characteristics obtained through device profiling process. You will see that all these only require users to follow very simple instructions without actually involving network administrators. So in our first video, we have going to start with our first scenarios with wire device onboarding. Let's take a look at our lab. So here we have Cisco ISE running version 112 at the IP of .102 and a domain controller as well as a certificate authority server running at .40. Here we have a user, admin1. Let's assume that user admin1 would like to bring his personal computer and connect to the network. And obviously his computer is not part of our domain. And admin1 is also a member of BYOD users AD group. So here, just to give you a high-level overview of the onboarding process, we have our little flow diagram here. So first, once the computer is connected to the network, since the computer may or may not have .1x supplicant installed, or even if it does, it will fail authentication. So it will have to go through wire map, and it will be presented with guest portal. So in the guest portal, user will be able to use their AD credentials to log in, and will be able to register the MAC address through a device registration page. Once the MAC address is registered, ISE will start the supplicant provisioning process, and part of this process will be requesting certificate from the certificate server on behalf of the user, since ISE is actually acting as a certificate or SCEP proxy. And once certificate is obtained, it will be pushed to the computer along with the network settings themselves. So for us here is the wire network settings. And then the user can use the certificate to get back onto the network and authenticate fully through eap-tls to get full access to the network. Okay, so now that we have understood the process, let's go ahead and start with our configuration. So before we begin, let me show you the user or user group on the AD BYOD users, and we can see here the only member we have in there is admin1. Okay, now we're going to log into our ISE server. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is to add the BYOD user groups to ISE, so you can use it in the authorization policies or other policies. So we go administration's external identity source, just like before. You guys probably are very familiar with this already at this point. Okay, then we go to AD. Okay, and then groups, add, select group from directory, and we know it's going to start off with BYOD. Here, select OK, and then save. Okay, next we're going to make sure that the ISE can talk to the SCEP server, so administration, certificates. Just like I mentioned, ISE is going to be acting as a SCEP proxy server, so there's no need for the user to actually communicate directly to our certificate server, and ISE was just going to request a certificate on the user's behalf since it has all the parameters from the authentication or radius authentication. So here we go to SCEP CA Profiles. We are going to add name, let's call it LM SCEP. For URL, I just want to make sure I don't have any typos, so I'm going to copy and paste what I already have. And this is just a standard Microsoft SCEP URL. So this is our IP of the server, .40. We can test connectivity. You can see right here, server response, connectivity successful. Then once you submit, and if you go to certificate store, it actually downloads the certificate of the RA. Okay, so that's just got added after we connected through SCEP. Since we're going to be using our guest portal here, let's go ahead and create our custom portal. So we go Administration, Web Portal Management, and Settings. You can always modify the default also, but here we want to create a new one. So you go to Guest, Multi-Portal Configuration, click on that, and then Add. You can see there's a default guest portal. Let's name it something like LM portal. We'll leave it default. Operations, we want to present AUP, acceptable use policy, at the first login only, and we definitely do not. We do wants to do self-provisioning flow, so that's very important. Okay, customization, we'll leave it alone. Authentication, we would like to use AD and fill over to local. So assuming you have the identity store sequence created already, so LM AD local. Okay, the last thing we want to do before we jump into the policy configuration is to modify the authentication source or identity source for My Device Portal. And we'll look at that later in this video, how to use our access device portals to manage users' devices. So here, authentication source under My Device Portal with identity source sequence, we're going to point to the same sequence, which is AD and local. Save. Okay, so now that's done, we can start off with authentication policies. We can see this is actually already in place from a previous video with LM wire map. So that's for MAC address bypass, and just to point out, here we just leave it allow protocol. Under internal use internal endpoint, we expand that. Under if user not found, it has continue set, so that's very important part of map. So that's when the computer or user first connect to the network to lock in. But once the user obtains the certificate, then we're actually going to be using this rule right here, lm-wire.1x. That will be authenticating through .1x, and we are allowing TLS, and we already have all the identity sequence set to use certificate. Okay, now that we have the authentication policies configured, all we have to do is authorization policies. As always, we're going to start off with our conditions. So first condition is for the BYOD. So here we go to policies, policy element conditions, and this particular condition is going to be used for the BYOD registered device to access using eap-tls. So we're going to go ahead and add conditions. We're going to call it LM wired BYOD and new condition. We want to make sure that the user is a part of BYOD user groups to access. Then go add, and then since it's wired, we're going to make sure the request is coming from a device type switch. And the last thing we want to look for is authentication type or EAP authentication, and it has to be eap-tls. Okay, submit. Next, we're going to create a downloadable ACL, and this is going to use for when the device first connects to the network and all it needs to access is the web portal or guest portal on ISE. So under downloadable ACL, let's go add, and we're going to call it LM ISE only. Again, just make sure I don't have a typo, I'm going to copy and paste what I already have. Here, allowing DSCP, allowing DNS, and anything going to ISE. You can actually lock it down to just port 8443, which is the default if you want, but here I'm just going to leave it open and then deny everything else. Submit. Okay, now we're going to create authorization profile. Click add. And we're going to call it LM wired CWD, and this is for presenting guest login page to users once it passed map. And for DACL, we want to make sure it can only access ISE, so picking a DACL from the one that we just created. And here with the web authentication, we want to select that and use a centralized Web Authentication or CWA, and the access list. This is actually a redirect access list for wired. So this is the access list we have already created on the switch. We'll show you in a second. That any traffic that matches this particular access list will be redirected to ISE. Okay, so we have a access list created already. So show you access list. So right here we have ACL redirect, and you can see we are denying DSCP, DNS, and traffic going to ISE because we did not redirect any of those traffic, but any other kind of web traffic, port 80 and 443, we want to redirect that to ISE. Okay, so ACL redirect, make sure the name matches. And the page that you want to redirect to, earlier in this video, we created a LM portal, our customized portal. So we point to that. And if you scroll down, you can see the actual attributes down here with the redirect ACL and then the redirect URL. Okay, so submit. We're going to create one more authorization profile, and this one is going to be used for blacklisting a device. So you can hear by default there's one called black hole wireless access. So let's go and duplicate that. Since we're dealing with wired, let's change that to LM wired blacklist. For DACO, again, if device gets blacklisted, all it needs to access is probably just ISE, because we're gonna redirect it to an error page. So ISE only again. And if you scroll down, we have a custom or advanced attribute here. We're gonna leave the URL redirect by default. You do not want to modify that. But for the redirect ACL, again, this is going to be the same one that we created, or we actually pointed to previously. So again, ACL redirect is just the redirect ACL that you created on the switch. Okay, make sure the name is correct, and then go submit. Okay, now that we have all the components, we can go back to our authorization policies and start creating some rules. So first, we're going to go from top down, insert new rule below. The first one, we're going to do a blacklisting. So we'll call it LM wired blacklist. And for the group, we're going to select endpoint identity group and blacklist. Because when you blacklist a device, the device will be placed under this particular blacklist group. Okay, so we'll tell it to look for that. And then let's say if the device is accessing from a device type switch, okay, that will basically mean wired. So type switch, then we want to give them the, let's see, wire blacklist. Okay, so that's done. Next, we create the BYOD eap-tls authentication rule. So rule below wired BYOD, and we know that at this point the device should have been registered through the device registration process or page. So here, endpoint device group, there's a group called register devices. So select that, and for condition, we have created a condition already under for authorization, and that is called LM wired BYOD. You can see we match the external group, BYOD user, make sure it's TLS, and if all these conditions are met, the device is good, and we want to grant them full access to the network, and here we select LM permit all. Okay. Now the last rule that we are going to create is more like a catch-all on all the wired access. So we'll call it LM wired CWA. So anything that does not match any of the rules above coming from a wired, it will be matching this rule, and then the user will be presented with the guest login page or guest portal. Okay, so for the condition, we'll make it very generic as far as any request coming from device type switch. Obviously, you can also do this by the radius attributes if you want. I mean, there's multiple ways of doing this to identifying as being authentication coming from wired. But for us, just keep it simple here. Device type switch. And when that happens, we want to choose Allen Wire CWA. That will be pushing redirect URL. Okay, so that's all done. Save. So now that like I mentioned earlier, as part of this, there is a step for supplicant provisioning. So now we need to define what exactly that needs to be pushed to the user computer. So the network setting itself, and to define that, we go to administration. Let's see, actually policies, policy elements and results, and we go client provisioning, and here's resources. You go add, and you want to select native supplicant profile. Here we'll call it LM wired wins TLS. Okay, operating system. Since we're dealing with Windows, we're just going to select Windows all, and we are doing wired, and the protocol we want it to use is TLS. Okay, with the key, let's leave it 1024. Submit. Okay, now that we have that network settings, we need to define when that network setting will be pushed. So that is done under policies and client provisioning. Okay, so this is a separate policy page for client provisioning. So now we need to define conditions and results. So conditions being what kind of devices we want to push this particular network setting to, and the result is what network setting would that be. So for us, let's call it LM wired wins, since we're dealing with on a Windows machine. Again, operating system, Windows all, condition. So before we push this supplicant to the user, we want to make sure first it's a part of BYOD, because if they're not, we do not want them to connect their personal device to the network. And then we add an attribute and make sure it's coming from wired. So the device would be device type equal to switch. Okay, the results here with the we're dealing with native supplicant configuration with config wizard. If you keep your ISE up to date as far as automatic online updates, you should have the latest version right here. And for us, it's this one right here, 10023. And then for the profile, then you pick the network setting that we just created, which is wirewinds TLS. Okay, so now that's done. Save. Okay, we have pretty much all the configuration that we need in place. We can now start with the client testing. Okay, so before we do that, I just want to mention a couple of things. On the one thing to note is on the switch configuration, the port. Okay, if you watched our previous video on the recommended switch configuration, you see right here the authentication order might have been .1x then map, and then priority is .1x and map. But once you start testing, you will see that you actually want to, for the order, you want map to happen first. So the user that does not have .1x supplicant install, or that's failing .1, or that do have supplicant but is failing authentication, does not have to wait for too long for the guest portal to be presented or for the timeout. So you can actually make the map happen first and then .1x, but again, you can prioritize it by having a .1x preamp map. So let's bring up our Windows test machine. So here we have Windows 7 non-domain. And before we begin the onboarding process, let's take a quick look at the certificate, just to show you that currently we do not have a trusted root for the LM-root CA certificate, and neither we have the personal certificate. You will see that after we've done onboarding, we have the certificate installed. And also for the network settings, as far as the settings on the NIC, here we have it set up to PEEP, and you will see that it would change to TLS. Now on the server, let me bring up a couple of pages. One will be the authentication monitoring page. The second one, I want to bring up the My Devices portal. While that's coming up, let me pull up one more page, which is the session, active session reporting. So that will be under session directory and active sessions. So now My Device portal, let's log in with the user admin one, since we'll be using a user admin one. So My Device portal, basically everyone who has access or allowed to register their devices should have access to this particular portal, so they can manage their registered device, whether to delete or to mark it as lost, which we will see a little bit later when we start testing. Okay, now that we have that pull up and that page ready to go, so we see we are currently sitting at we should be sitting at the central web auth page right now, since we just passed the map and we got the LM only access list as well as the authorization profile. So go back to the test machine and bring up a browser. The first user we're going to use to test with is the employee one, which we know that it should fail the process since it's not part of the BYOD user group. Okay, so we got accept certificate, and here we at the guest portal login page. So we'll log in as the employee one, and the password login. And here it's telling you that the device configuration is not supported by the setup wizard, and the reason that you're seeing that error message is because back in the client provisioning policies, we have a conditions set as far as only allow BYOD user or a member of BYOD users to be able to download or perform client provisioning. But since employee one is not part of BYOD user, that's why we're encountering this particular error. So basically we are preventing employee one, although it's actually passed the authentications, because if you go back to look at the monitoring page, you see employee one successfully log in as a guest. So authentication passed, but authorization or actually client provisioning process actually fail. Essentially, we are blocking employee one from even actually register the device. Now we know that employee one has failed. Next, let's try the admin one, but before we actually do that, let me go and make sure we end these or terminate the sessions that belongs to employee one. You see right here employee one as far as username and came through as a web auth, and the session status is shown as authenticated. So let's make sure that we terminate that so we can start cleanly with the session terminations. And you see this little page right here is very handy as part of your troubleshooting. Anytime you have a client stuck in session or old session, or even encounter like a session expired, you might want to come over to this page and make sure that you disconnect that and start basically force a new fresh session. Okay, so that we do that, let's bring it back up our web browser, and this time we're going to use the user admin one. Okay, with the username admin one and then the password. And I can see that the red error has now gone. With the description, I guess this came from the previous testing that we did. So description, we could put something descriptive so the user can easily identify this particular MAC address. For us, it's, let's call it LM, just give it a name, make sure it's the same name, LM Windows 7 non-corp, and we're just going to specify this as wire also, because wireless is going to have a different MAC address. So we know this is Ethernet, wire Ethernet. Now we click register. So when you get that prompt, say yes, and start making the, I guess, configuration change. And now we have a network setup assistant popped up windows. So click and start. You see right here it says application will automatically configure your LAN device settings. So click start. So wait for the whole process to finish. So right now, as part of the process, it will be requesting certificates. ISE requesting certificate on behalf of the user, and then hand the certificate back to the user. So he is asking you to accept. You can say view certificate, and this is the ISE certificate itself that's signed by our LabMinutes. So yes, we want to accept that. And now it's asking you, since we currently do not have LabMinutes installed, it's asking you if you want to install that basically. So click yes. Okay, now we have completed the network setup assistant process or onboarding, and we should have network connectivity. We can go back to the monitor page and see if we can tell from this. All right. Let's try to go to an internet. If it doesn't work, there's a chance that you might need to disable and enable the network adapter. So here we can go disable, and at the same time we can go onto the switch itself and shut. Since we are doing a VM here, just disabling the NIC doesn't really bounce the switch port. So we want to make sure we clear the state on the switch. And let's bring it back up. While it's coming up, we can double check the certificate. So it said there's a pop-up that says additional information is required, so make sure you don't miss that pop-up. And here Windows is asking you to select certificate. So this is the certificate that we just obtained through the onboarding process. We'll click yes, we want to use the admin1 certificate. And now looks like we already have a network connectivity. So let's verify that. Go to cisco.com and you can see we have the network access. So like I mentioned, sometimes it works, sometimes it's the computer, the machine gets switched onto the permit state automatically at the end of the process, but sometimes actually have to connect and disconnect the port just to force the authentication using the TLS or eap-tls. Okay, now if you look at the certificate store here under personal, if you reload, here we see an admin certificate. Okay, and if you go under the trusted root certificate and again reload, you see now we have installed the LMrootC as part of that. Okay, now on the monitoring page, we have right here, when we came in the second time we enabled the network interface, we came in as the LM permit all. And if you look at the detail, it should come in as eap-tls, which it did, and it's now become a register device. It hit the BYOD policies that we created, and here's all the 80 group that the user is a member of. Okay, so it's just a regular eap-tls authentication. Okay, now we go to the My Device portal. Since we have registered the device, it should show up and it's already turned green, which is registered. And here's the description. Okay, so now we can kind of play around with this. So let's say the device has been lost and the user would like to block the device from further access to the network. So what they can do is just click lost and then confirm. You go back to the monitor page. You can see an empty lock entry, which is usually indicative of COA. So actually if you scroll to the right, say right here, dynamic authorization succeeded. And now if you go back to our test machine and trying to access Cisco.com one more time, you can see it now we get redirected to ISE since that device now become a blacklist device. Again, refresh, you can see identity group has turned into blacklist and we are now encountering this block page that's again hosted on ISE. Okay, so again going back to the My Device portal, and if the user wished to reinstate it or allow the device to have network access one more time, then we can click reinstate, go back to the monitor page, empty lock, which is the COA, and looks like it doesn't really force the eap-tls to happen. So again, what we need to do is because right now we're going to be stuck in the central web auth one more time. So what we need to do again, disable shut no shut, and this would be equivalent if you're dealing with a physical machine is unplug and plug in your Ethernet cable. And let's bring that back up, give it a few seconds, and then let's try the Cisco.com one more time, and now we're back on the network. Okay, refresh, we got permit all. Okay, so the last thing we want to try is to go to My Device portal and delete this device entirely. So click yes. Now as far as the activity on the monitor page, you see that nothing's really happened. So just by deleting the device doesn't really cut the device off the network. So you can see you can still Let's browse around. So network connectivity remains, unlike the blacklisting where the ISE sent out COA packets to the switch. But now, if we go to, or if the device is disconnected from the network, so again, disable, switch, shut, no shut, again, enable. The second time the device is trying to get back onto the network, it should not be able to. And you can see now we're back on the essentially the guest portal page, although the device still have the certificate installed and everything, but as soon as you deleted the device from the My Devices page, it got removed from the registered device identity group. So, okay, if you refresh, you can see admin is coming in as wire CWA, and compared to what we have earlier as being a registered device, now it's just simply a profile Windows 7 workstation, and that's why it was not able to get a full access to the network. Okay, so that wraps up our video on wired 802.1x onboarding with ISE BYOD. The next video will be looking at wireless onboarding. So thank you for watching LabMinutes.com, and I'll see you guys in the next ISE video.